Today's program, and I'm going to butcher some names as I do this, but hopefully you'll forgive me. As founder, music director, and conductor of the orchestra, how's that one? Yay! Symphony of Chicago, Maestro Mina Zikri uses his considerable talents to forge relationships with artists and musical organizations throughout the world, all in the name of developing new audiences for classical music. As a violinist and assistant conductor to Maestro Daniel Barenboim, he travels with the West Eastern Divan. Yay, it's 2 for 2. Orchestra on their annual tours to major music festivals and concert halls around the world. As a member of the faculty of the DePaul University Community Music Division, his many career distinctions include being named one of the 12 finalists in the 2007 Gustav Mahler International Conducting Competition, where he was chosen from 223 candidates from 40 countries. He is currently music director of the Northbrook Symphony Orchestra, which performs at the Sheely Center for the Performing Arts in Northbrook, and is currently in its 44th season. Welcome, Maestro.
Yes. Morning. If you don't mind, first of all, can you hear me well? Okay, I'm going to sit here because I don't want to hide behind the podium. I just want to be able to communicate better. And when I was asked to do a presentation today, I thought about the best thing to talk about, and 3 things came to mind. One of them is the idea of listening to classical music, which is challenging to most of us. Listening to music in general. The second thing was the experience of being a conductor. Yes, I can. Yeah, I could also do this. How about now? Let me see. Yeah, how about now? Better? Okay, and I can speak louder as well. So the second thing I would like to talk about is the experience of being a conductor and what it means, the lifestyle of a conductor. And then the third thing I wanted to talk about is my own background as it relates to what's happening in the world, because I can never escape that it's part of how I make there are components in everyone's personality that you could never have them go to the background. You always have, it's always present. So I'm always conscious of who I am and where I am and what's happening in the world around us. And these things are related to music. They're not, they really are inseparable. So the first point about listening to music, and I would like to take questions at the end, please, if you will forget your question, I don't know if you have a way to write them down, but this is important because I will best address this based on what you want to ask, not based on what I tell you. Listening to music has always been a question, and we're always wondering why classical music audience are declining, or less people are coming to classical music concerts, or music is not so popular, or younger generations do not want to attend classical music concerts. There are several reasons for that, but I think first we need to identify what listening is. And listening in English is one of the languages that has the advantage of differentiating between listening and hearing. So if you hear something, you hear noise, is different than if you're listening for something. And as we're sitting right here, I'm sure if we're quiet for a second, you see, you hear the air, the vents probably, you know, we all hear that, but we're not listening for it. So therefore, it's basically a sound that goes, you know, into your ears and comes out the other way. It has no implication on your, in fact, some people like to have the what they call white noise to sleep over something that relaxes them. But music, classical music is not like this. Classical music, listening means it's an active act, meaning that you have to participate. You're not just going to sit there and music is going to come to you. There has to be a participation on part of the audience. That's why in COVID it was a really big problem for us, because it was not about playing the music. The performers are always affected by the energy of the listeners and of the audience, and it does change the performance to a very big extent. So when it comes to listening, I want to give you a difference between two situations. You hear the elevator music sometimes, and you get into an elevator and they're just running something in the background. Even if it's a Beethoven symphony, that's still not music at that point, because unless you stop and listen for it. Now, if your cell phone rings and you happen to like the ring of the cell phone, at that point you made it into music, because you're actually listening, you're enjoying that ring for one reason or the other. So defining what music is depends on the listener and on the receiver. And at the same time, it's not something you could just just watch a movie, take your popcorn and a soda and just sit there and enjoy. Nothing is going to come to you automatically. It always has to be. Now, the difficulty becomes, and I'll be the first one to admit this, because I know a lot of people feel bad telling me, oh, I don't understand this piece, or I go to concerts, but I don't really understand the music. Let me share something with you. As a conductor and somebody who spent all my life in music, there are concerts I go to, I don't understand the music, and sometimes I get bored. So I just want to bring if this is news for you, I'm glad, but if you already knew this, then that's wonderful, because what I'm saying is that music doesn't just come to you. When I'm studying a famous piece of music, I have to keep looking at it multiple times. The preparation times has to be adequate, because there are things that kind of transform, and I make relationships between the different parts of the music in a way that is listening, because I'm now listening with my brain, not only with my ears, because you have to, if you don't make these connections and understand what the sound is doing, then probably you're not going to get anything out of it. And I want to stress that when you're listening to a piece of music, you are not understanding a particular idea. There are two ways of understanding music, or loving music, or liking music. One is by association. So let's say I'm in high school, I have a favorite piece of music, whether it's a singer, a pop singer, or a country singer, or even a classic, a Brahms symphony or a Mozart symphony, okay? And I was listening to this piece, and at that same time, I had a crush on a girl or a guy or whatever I am, okay? And I just happened to like this person, and at that particular period, I'm listening to this piece. So we spend really good days together, and then I graduate from high school. I go to school for something else, to university. I become a professional, and then I hear that same piece, and all of a sudden it brings back to me the feelings of that period of time when I was, in love with somebody or felt something. So that has nothing to do with the music itself, but it brought by association, you love this piece of music. So anytime you hear it, you will enjoy it. So that's one way of enjoying music. The other way of enjoying music is actually understanding or forming an own idea of your understanding of the piece itself. Meaning, simply what music does is takes one simple music idea and then turns it around and does shapes of it. So let's say, if I say Pop, 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 pop. That's the Twinkle by Mozart, right? Twinkle, 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 little star. If I do ta 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 ta, right? So I'm doing the same thing, but with a different way of thinking about it. That's what we call theme and variation, where a composer realizes a theme and then all music is like this. Now, it did not really give you any message when it went around, but you understand the thought. So listening to music in a way, it opens different ways of thinking, but it doesn't bring you a specific idea. So if you go to a concert, and sometimes I do this myself, I feel bad, I don't understand the piece, but I don't have to understand anything. All I have to do is make a connection between this phrase and the next phrase, and this melody and the next melody, and how they both interact and how they might come back at the end. That's harder to do for a piece of music that you listen to for the first time. So here's my advice. If you want the best concert experience, and now that we have recordings and resources around us, that was not really the case in the past. If you know you're going to a concert and you're about to listen to Beethoven's First Symphony, my advice would be find it on YouTube or on your iPhone or iPad or Apple list, whatever it is, and listen to it several times. Get your ear familiarized with the piece. You don't have to read about it. You don't have to understand anything. Let the sound speak to you. That's the substance of the piece. It's not, yes, it's interesting that it has historical, and the Third Symphony by Beethoven was dedicated to Napoleon. And then when he knew Napoleon declared himself an emperor, he tore down I have to tell you a funny story about that. Arturo Toscanini, the famous conductor, Italian conductor, was asked once about this particular piece, about the Eroica, and somebody told him, Maestro, what do you think of the historical association of the Beethoven Eroica and how it was dedicated to Napoleon? And then get asking this complicated, long question. And Toscanini looked at him and he said, to me, the Beethoven Eroica is only Allegro con brio. Allegro con brio means it's basically the character or the tempo marking that Beethoven put to the music. So he only related to the piece. Yes, he knew all the information, but it did not affect his experience. And at that point, he only thought of the sound of the music. He did not really want to care much about the association of the piece. Now, but we have to understand that there's some historical significance to sometimes the association can be very painful. Like take, for example, the fact that Wagner's music was played in concentration camps in Germany. That becomes, you cannot say, oh, I'm just not gonna, I'm gonna listen to Wagner and forget. No, there are people who it brings so much that has to be respected. So in a way, of course, you do. The second point, other than the association, what I was talking about, the relating musical ideas, that is yours to do. So in other words, you could create your own simple ideas. If you have listened to a lot of music, your ears are sophisticated in terms of making more linkage. But I can promise you, if you do that, every time you come out of a concert, you're going to come out with something new. Because it will definitely, even if you hear the same piece for multiple times, there is always a new realization. I spend hours and hours working into one piece of music, one movement, and every time I go back to it, whether it's a day later or a year later, I always find something. We all know this from reading books. That's why people repeat reading books, because sometimes the time is different, the realization, your own experience is different. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. So if you have any questions regarding listening to music, that's an important topic to me, because if I don't address this topic, I'm going to run out of audience very soon. So it's in my personal interest that people at least understand, listening to music, or share with each other how they listen to music, because sometimes people enjoy music for various reasons, and they're almost embarrassed to say, oh, I like this because of that. You could like music for whatever reason. The moment a piece of music enters your ear, it's yours. You do whatever you want with it. One last thing I'm going to add before I move into lifestyle of a conductor. The sound, and that's what makes music different from any other form of art. The sound is physical. The sound is a physical phenomenon. In other words, the sound penetrates the body through the ear. If you understand how the sound waves sometimes can break, if a plane is flying too low, it could break the glass because of the waves of the sound. But what I'm trying to say is that since music is physical, it does affect us physically. Let's say there was an art exhibition here, and there is a portrait or a painting that I just do not care for, I do not like. All I have to do is either turn my head the other way or close my eyes, and that painting disappears. But let's say there is a DJ here in this room, and they're insisting that the music is okay, and I'm sitting here trying to close my ears. It will not work, because if I don't hear it in my ears, I'm going to hear it in my stomach. You know, the pounding of the bass. So what I'm trying to say is that the sound is physical. It does. When you hear something interesting, sometimes you get goosebumps when you hear something that you really relate to. A certain moment in the symphony, music can get too loud, but not with the concept of loud as a volume, but loud in terms of intensity. Like the texture gets really complicated, and then all of a sudden something major happens, like big new sound. Good composers are good at this, to build a good climax with sound. So sound has a physical part of it, and people relate to that differently. Like I said, some people get goosebumps, some people just play music to fall asleep. Some people cannot fall asleep if there is music. So please have all your questions about this part of the talk, and we can discuss this at the end. The second part I want to talk about, do you have a question? Anybody? To the end?
We need to wait until the end so that
okay.
everybody can be heard with the microphone, and I hope that works for you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
I just didn't want to miss any questions.
Okay.
Okay. The second part, I will not take a lot of time talking about this, but I just want people to or share with you what it means to be a conductor. I'm going to speak against my own self right now, and I'm going to tell you that this is, by the way, anything I'm going to say about this is subjective, which means it's my own opinion, and anybody can disagree, and my other fellow conductors can disagree as well. I do not think that a conductor can be a conductor in the real sense of the word before they are at least 60 years old or older, for multiple reasons. Conducting is not a craft that you could just learn and execute on stage. Conducting is a combination of experiences and skills like musicology, listening, training your ears on a very different level than a normal listener would, being efficient with studying, psychology. You have to know how to deal with the orchestra. Everybody is different. Anybody has different needs. And if anybody's upset, or at least you didn't do enough to make them as comfortable as possible, it's going to reflect on you. So you need to know how to make musicians in the orchestra at least comfortable, if not happy. It's sociology. The orchestra relationship between people in the orchestra is very complicated, and it's a community like any other community where there are hierarchies and there, it's always complicated like it is everywhere. And it is also business skills, it's marketing, it's being approachable by audiences, thinking outside of yourself more than inside of yourself, because if I only conduct my wish list of pieces I want to conduct, I might upset everybody in the audience. I have to know which community I am in, what do people like to listen to, of course, within reason. Like I would not, if I'm a classical music conductor, I'm not going to bring jazz because there are people who are better, unless I'm doing some kind of a collaborative project. But if people want to hear jazz, they would have been in the Green Mill. They would not come to my concert hall, right? So I need to understand that anything I introduce that's outside of my area of speciality is something I'm doing for the audience just as an experiment. And experiments can go right or can go wrong or can be successful. So, but the understanding that you cater to people's needs cannot compromise others who want to come to traditional classical music experience. You have to guess the energy in the room. We need to communicate always with our audience to understand what they felt about this concert. Are the concerts too long? Are they too short? Is this kind of music too intense? Putting these two works together was too much? Or all these things have to be taken into consideration. So in my opinion, I'm supporting my theory of 60-year-old conductor by two things. One is a proof. Those of you who are classical music lovers and like to listen to conductors, if you look for somebody specialized in a particular kind of classical music, like let's say I would like to listen to all German repertoire, Brahms, Beethoven, Schumann, all of that. Which conductor would I want to listen to? Those of you who can answer this question, you will probably find that the answer is always an older conductor rather than a younger conductor, because if it takes the meat 2 hours to cook, it takes 2 hours to cook. If you try to cook it in 15 minutes, eat it at your own discretion. So it just a lifetime experience of a conductor understanding and presenting this type of music is what you're looking for. Then I can tell you, for example, if I'm looking for Eastern European repertoire and some interesting Dvorak, I want to listen to Sir George Solti, for sure. His recordings are fantastic, Dvorak Symphony recordings. And with particular orchestras too, like the London Symphony and such. If I want to listen to Beethoven or I want to listen to Mozart, I do want to listen to Barenboim. But I know that Mozart is going to almost sound like Beethoven. I even know what to expect. So that kind of fingerprint or a character that you build as a conductor, it cannot be done from day one. And it cannot be done with a young conductor. You might have the talent and the stamina and the enthusiasm and the energy, and you get everybody in. But the substance usually is after the product is finished. The lifestyle of a conductor is not any different than anybody else's, except that I find myself having to spend a lot of time alone with the score. And I have to balance that when I'm standing in front of the orchestra, because rehearsing becomes a totally different situation. In rehearsal, I'm catering to the need of the people in front of me. So it's important for any conductor to have a music director position, because you need to know the orchestra that is in front of you, the caliber of musicians, their age, their experience, the location, all of that plays into this. And I find that I have to engage both the alone hours that I studied the score and the time I'm sharing with the orchestra at the same time, and make these two happen. I cannot just be in my own world and just serving what I have studied and what I saw as potential problems in the score. That has to be communicated. So it's a lot of studying. It's, believe it or not, it's a lot of administrative work. I have to be a little bit involved because every single thing we do in the administration of the orchestra caters to the final product. And there are small elements that could contribute to a negative experience. So it's not that you do this out of love of control, but you need to just make sure that the final product is all ideally lines up correctly and everything works together. A conductor usually is an instrumentalist at the beginning, or at least a vocalist, somebody who studied music for sure, more intensely, and then at the peak of their instrumental career, they go into conducting. We've seen this recently, that people go into conducting too soon. Or, excuse me, if it's a child conducting, that is not a problem. You can have a talent, a protege talent, but if you're looking for a real experience, of course, it doesn't happen till later when the musician peaks on their own instrument and become more efficient with the instrument so that they can understand, preferably also an orchestral instrument. Most or big number of conductors are pianists. That's because they can read the score on the piano. I don't have that advantage, but the other advantage, a conductor that plays an instrument from inside the orchestra, like a violin, for example, is that you understand about string playing more than a pianist would. And that's not a small thing. 2/3 of the orchestra is strings, and the sound of a symphony orchestra is mainly determined by the sound of the string section. The violins, the violas, the cellos, and the double basses. Because a lot of them, if you have a concept of sound and you're able to communicate that to them, you get the sound you want. The woodwinds, as you know, they're one on a part. So there's first flute, second flute, first oboe, second oboe, first clarinet, second clarinet, etc. Each of these people, they play one on a part. But the first violins, you have 12 or 14 violins playing the same part. So if everybody plays on their own, you're gonna hear it. Or you're actually, you might not hear it, but you're going to feel it. You're gonna hear something missing. You know, my mother is not a musician, and I go to my home country to conduct once a year, the National Symphony. And there was one year when the group happened, the first violins happened to be, you know, sometimes personnel change, but it happened to be a very good group. They were all willing to cooperate, listen to each other. And my mother came to me after the concert. She said, you know what? You have been coming here to conduct for about 11 years now. Something was different today. Something sounded better. You know, my mother, it's a fingerprint. She will always fall asleep in a second movement of any symphony. Even if it's I can predict it. Yeah. So, and that was my trick when I was younger. I would just play slow music. She'd go to sleep. That's it. But the point is that she did feel it once it worked. And then in an orchestra, a conductor from inside the orchestra is really helpful because you could speak the same language. Oftentimes, when we play, when I played the violin, and there was a conductor that played piano or was a vocalist, it was harder to make that connection. The orchestra has to be willing to go 2 extra miles to accommodate what the conductor needs, because we had to understand in technical terms what they want musically. So that's another thing that I find also interesting or essential about conductor relating to the orchestra. There are so many things I could add about the experience of a conductor, but I want to tell you that there is what I see personally, again, this is all subjective, this is what I see as a problem with the conductors in general. The etiquette of a rehearsal, that nobody talks back at you. Unless somebody has a question, and if they have a question, they actually ask the principal chair to ask the question. Usually you don't make, unless it's a less formal setting, just for sake of organization. So now you are giving basically exclusive rights of talking. You can say whatever you want to whoever you want, and almost nobody can talk back at you, and you're already standing on a podium, so you're higher than everybody else, and that's dangerous. Because immediately you already think that you're higher than everybody else. And this is the moment where the conductor's career will end. Because the moment they do that, nobody will want to work with them anymore. It could almost sneak, it's almost a disease, it can sneak on you. And let me tell you two funny things about this. When I went to my home country to conduct the orchestra for the first time, I met some of the, I used to study there, so I met some of the students that were really little when I left. I was a teenager. Now they're adults and they play in the orchestra. And we were having coffee together, and we were discussing the issue of a conductor. And I said, you know, it takes an orchestra musician 20 seconds to understand everything about the conductor. If they're good or bad, if they know their music or they don't, if they're a good person or a bad person, if they're arrogant or not arrogant, if they're funny, if they're tired, if they're, you can, it's only 20 seconds is all you need. And the guy held my hand and he said, no, I'm sorry. It doesn't take 20 seconds. He said, all I know, I just want to see him coming from the backstage to the podium. And I already know everything about the conductor. Yeah. So the orchestra musicians are very intelligent, and they deal with a lot of people. And that conductor that thinks that they're going to stand there and be going to be telling them what to do, it just doesn't work. But at the same time, you have to balance that with some positive authority, because you do want to tell them, you're not telling them, I know better than you, but you say, I'm offering a different point of view than yours that's valid, and here's how we can do it. You make them believe it. To me, always the best concerts happened when everybody managed to think as much as possible the same way. So if we think the same way about a particular piece of music, we always got the best result. So that's the last thing I'll say about this. The last thing I will touch on quickly, that is, I cannot, of course, ignore, I don't know if you all know, I am from Egypt originally. I was born to a Coptic Christian family, a minority Christian population in Egypt. And I grew up with Daniel Barenboim in the West Eastern Levan Orchestra. Excuse me. The orchestra, basically, the idea of this was started by Daniel Barenboim and Edward Said, the famous Palestinian author. Barenboim being a magnificent world-class Israeli musician. They put together that orchestra so that they bring people from the Middle East to play music together, people from the Arab countries and from Israel. And this has been going on for 25 years now. The 25th anniversary is the... Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. The 25th anniversary of that is coming up this summer. Barenboim, unfortunately, is going through some health issues, but he's getting better, and we're all looking forward to working with him again. But the idea basically started as a humanitarian project, nothing political to it. And I just want to share with you on a personal note that what happened back in October and what has been happening since has been devastating to me personally and to a lot of us in this orchestra. And we cannot just say we're an orchestra that just plays music. This is part of life. It has been really hard on all of us. We're meeting for the first time in April 15th. We're playing a concert in the Berlin Philharmonic Hall in Berlin, obviously. And it would be the first time to see each other and see just the interaction. There is a lot of feelings, lots of people have different experiences and rather difficult ones. Social media did not help because some people just make impulsive comments that are insensitive sometimes. But what is astounding to me is I know that anybody I know or I have ever met, just people, there is a bottom line. Nobody wants to die anywhere. And I wish just we agree on this, because if we agree on this, things will be a lot easier. But this is a personal thing I just wanted to share, because if anybody wants to ask me about this project, I'm also willing to take questions about the West Eastern Liban Orchestra. So I would like to remind you what the three things I talked about are, so that I can take your questions. First was listening to music and the different ways to listen to music. Second was lifestyle of a conductor from my own point of view. Third thing is my experience and where I'm from as it relates to what's happening in the world right now. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure listening.
We have a microphone and Arnie is going to take these in the phone.
Thank
Is
you.
this working?
Yes.
I was shocked when you said 60-year-old. I'd like to know your comments about Leonard Bernstein, who came on as a very young substitute and was like such a star immediately.
Yeah, thank you. There, you know, Bernstein, I cannot count him as one of the normal people, you know. It was totally, there are people that appear in a certain moment in time, and their presence is vertical. It just hits the world vertically, that there is the before and the after. Leonard Bernstein happened to be the first American conductor that takes conducting to the world. He spoke fluent German. He went to, did magnificent recordings with the Vienna Philharmonic, obviously. Some of their best recordings are done with him. But Bernstein had also, he had the TV show, and there was, like I said, a significance to him appearing at that time. But I was mostly referring to any conductor who takes on the path of developing from like the path that I went through particularly. You're not going to see my face or my name on TV anytime soon, but that doesn't mean I have nothing substantial to offer, or at least I think that. The fame and what interests the media sometimes is different than what the substance is. But Bernstein had both. He had the appeal of a star, and he also had a lot to offer as a musician. It was really fantastic. I happen not to be a fan of his style of conducting, but I cannot deny that he was one of the greatest conductors ever lived. And his knowledge, this, I think, story was mentioned to me by, I remember Barenboim told this story. Somebody went to Bernstein and asked him about a particular piece of music. I think it was a Shostakovich symphony. I don't know what it was exactly, just so that I don't give you the wrong quote. And they were in his room in a concert hall, and there was a piano like this. And the guy asked, whoever that was, asked Bernstein, so what did you think of this symphony? Oh, it's terrible. Look, and then he sits on the piano. He starts to play the entire score, which has not been reduced for the piano from memory. He's playing. Look, he plays this. He puts this chord, and then he transposes to this, and then he makes this modulation. But the point is that he decided he doesn't like the piece after he knows the piece so well that he can play it by heart. That's an informed, you know, that's a great brain, a great thinking brain. So I think Barenboim told this story in the sense that he was trying to tell us, before you like or dislike something, know it first, and then decide that you don't like it. And that's why he was I think in terms of substance, that's what I respect most about him. Yeah.
Good morning. I really appreciated your comments. I have a question. I have many questions, but this one is about our listening.
Yeah.
And how going to a concert as opposed to listening to music on a CD engages the visual component. Because if I'm just listening to a CD, I'm not watching musicians playing. I'm hearing the sound of their instruments. But do you feel that being in a concert hall can sometimes be a distraction, particularly if you have a particularly emotional violinist who's doing this all the time, a soloist who distracts you perhaps from the music as a whole?
Yeah.
I mean, I usher frequently at the Chicago Symphony and have the opportunity to be in various places in the auditorium or even behind the orchestra. And some of the experiences of being there in person, particularly sitting behind the orchestra in the so-called terrace. And recently I did that for a performance of Holst's Planets. And if you're right, sitting over the percussion during Mars, it's a visceral experience. But how do you feel about the visual component of being in a music hall?
Yeah. That's a very good question. It's not only the visual component. It's also being in a concert hall engages a whole set of senses. There is the smells. True. There is the visual component that you talked about. There is also the energy of the room. The performance, I don't know if you've ever done that. Chicago Symphony, you know, they repeat their concerts 3 or 4 times every concert cycle. You go to one day, same conductor, same soloist, same orchestra. You go the next day, it's totally different. Why? It's a different performance. It's not the same piece anymore. And this is very important to know, because if it's the same piece, then what are we doing playing the Beethoven symphonies for 250 years? This doesn't make any sense. The music only exists at the moment it's being played. And this I learned from Barenboim, that he always said, we would rehearse something and then we spend hours trying to refine that what he's rehearsing, hours and hours. And then we come the next day and we do exactly what are you doing? But it starts screaming at us. And we were doing what you rehearsed. They'll say, no, that was yesterday. Today is something else. But in a way, you see the idea here, this is genius, because he's not trying to rehearse a way of playing. He's trying to rehearse a way of thinking. So when you go to a concert, you're going, let's say you just had a fight with your best friend right before you go to a concert. That is not going to be the same concert for you that if you had a lovely day and it was all sunny and you were on the beach for a couple hours and you decided to go to the concert at the end of the day. That's going to be a different experience. So these things do make a difference. Now, in terms of the moving violinist, if you felt like the movement was too much, then it was too much. Because sometimes the idea of a good performance is that you're seeing a musician involved in the music. You're not seeing a musician putting on the act of playing music. I remember we had a conversation with Yo-Yo Ma and Barenboim. They were together, and we asked them about stage fright. How do you not get nervous on stage? And Yo-Yo Ma said his point of view was, I just feel like I'm in my living room and I'm sharing the love of music with everybody. It's such a lovely approach to this. And then we asked Barenboim the same question, and he said, yeah, the way I avoid stage fright, I just forget that there is anybody around me. And you could really see this. You could see the difference in that both ways, of course, work. When you see Oyoma playing, how much that man is able to give when he plays music. But when you see Barenboim, it's also how much he's able to give, but into the music. He's not concerned with who is asleep or who's awake or who's interested, who's not interested. Somehow he's able to draw everybody to the piano where he's performing or to the orchestra when he's conducting. So if you feel that the motion was too much of somebody, it means that there's too much acting and it's not aligned. If the motion goes with the sound and what is happening, you will not feel, even if they were moving too much, you're not going to feel that. So don't let anybody take that away from you. If you feel like there was too much movement, there was too much movement, for sure.
So I have a question about
Yeah.
acoustics and sound projection. How do you integrate the double basses and the first violin, the gap in hearing from when the note is played between the gap between I may hear in the front and the back, and there's a sound gap, maybe a tenth of a second. How do you handle that?
Oh.
How do you adjust to different concert halls?
Yeah. So just those who didn't hear the question, there is a gap between, in fact, not just the double basses and the violins, but some people who sit in the back, like the trombones or anybody with a distance. There is a delay of a second, and not just the delay of the second. There is somehow the sound could bounce in the hole and come back to you. You hear. Sometimes I have to tell you, it's a difficult thing to do because sometimes the podium of the conductor is the worst place to listen because you're getting everything that way and it's also going to the hole and it's coming to you that way. So sometimes the sound that you're hearing is not real sound. And the way this requires experience by the orchestra, but that's why there is a baton, because sometimes people do need to take their cues based on what they see, not based on what they hear. So I don't know if those of you sat in the terrace of the Chicago Symphony, it's a really eye-opening experience to see how the brass players, they're almost ahead of the conductor. They're exactly with his hand, while the violins could afford to, they're a little bit of a delay because they're closer to the front. So you deal with this by experience, and also the acoustics of the hall can help. We try to have it somewhat dry on stage so that we can hear each other better, and the whole, if it's carpeted halls usually are the worst because they make things harder to hear, at least for people on stage. But there are just different considerations. But that's one of the challenges when you go from a rehearsal to a concert, or to even from a concert to a concert with fuller audience and a different sound. Then you just, the waves, it's different. So you just have to keep, and then you also have people to ask on either sides. There were times where I thought things were not together, and I asked somebody in the back of the hall, they say, no, it's lining up correctly. So now I know it's where I'm standing. It's not particularly, of course.
My question is, when I go to a concert, I look at what the orchestra members are doing and how the conductor is conducting. And sometimes I don't see the orchestra, the people in the orchestra looking at the conductor.
Yeah.
Okay. And I wonder, wait a minute,
Yeah.
do they need the music to look at 100%, or how much are they really being conducted?
Yeah.
Could I add on to her question?
Yes.
Because it's really tied to it. And that is, how do you achieve what your mind feels, what you're feeling? How do you achieve it through the orchestra?
Yeah.
Can you even show us and, address both of those?
Yeah, of course. If you have instruments, I'll show you, but nobody did. But we could do something. there are multiple parts to the answer of this question. One of them is the orchestra does not need to look at the conductor all the time, but they have to be aware of what they're doing. So they do need the music. They do memorize their parts. So they do need the music. I personally like to memorize my score because then I can communicate more and go to whoever needs me at the moment. It puts me in a more comfortable place. But the orchestra, they will not, they cannot memorize their part. They're actually not supposed to. But when they look at their part, they can see what the conductor is doing. So I have to know that my hand motion, you know, they don't have to look directly. Now, periodically, they're gonna check in for eye contact for a certain character as much as they can. But if at some point in the rehearsal, I feel like there is not enough eye contact, I tell them, no, this point, they even there is a sign of eyeglasses they put in the music, because that means that at the point, please check in with the conductors. There is a slowing down or some crucial transition that we need to go through. But regularly, you're never supposed to play not looking, or not being, at least keeping that, you know, peripheral vision. You know, you see the conductor, you know, at least from the side of your eye, but you always have to be aware, because at any point, anything can happen. They want to slow down, they want to speed up, especially if you play with a spontaneous conductor who does not like to do things the same way. So that's one thing. In terms of achieving how one would want to achieve something, it really, you are in the mercy of the orchestra. So that's why I was saying, if you talk to them from a higher place, if they don't want to do it, it will never happen. So it is, again, it's in your own interest that they think the same way as you are, because that way, when they see the gesture, it confirms what has been rehearsed, and then you could go that way. So it's basically trying to create the same way of thinking.
Okay, I took your advice seriously. And do you have another hour? Because I have too many questions.
Yeah,
So
I have the time, but
I'm going to limit it, and we're
I-
going to give Judy a chance too. But I'm to the question that I asked.
Yeah,
We don't have any instruments, and we're not going to put anyone on the piano. You're also looking to someone whose musical background started with the accordion. So I make apologies
I love the accordion.
but I love what you had to say, and I have many questions, so I'm going to restrict them to this one. We all can sing one song here that everybody knows. You know,
Yeah.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
Yeah,
If we sang that, we would all be together.
yeah,
How would you change that? How does your mind make us? And I'll use this example. I once bought a piece that I loved, which is Rhapsody in Blue by Gershwin. But I didn't buy a performance, I bought a piece. Then I saw Juju Wang play Rhapsody in Blue, and I threw everything away, and I only watched that performance because she did things with it that no one that I had seen before do.
yeah.
So how do you achieve that with the audience, with the orchestra?
Let me show you. Let's do a practical example. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna dictate you how to say the word yes. We're gonna say the word yes together, okay? So can you say it with me? But wait till I give you the cue to say it.
Yes.
Okay? Now say it with me again. You see what I mean? These are the same word, but two different ways. So if I give you yes, that's determined. If I go yes, that's it. So answering to your question, that's how you basically that's how the gesture would make the difference.
Hello. Could you tell us a little more about the Palestine Israel project?
Yes. This project started in 1999 when Weimar was chosen the cultural capital of Europe. Barenboim and Edward Said. I don't know if you're Daniel Barenboim, people know who he is. Edward Said was a Palestinian American literature. Grew up in Egypt, was educated in Egypt. He actually was born in Palestine before 48. His family had to leave when after the war of 48, their homes were taken. as Palestinians. The land was occupied at this point, and then of course Israel was announced as a state, and then he went to Egypt and studied, and then he came to the United States. He did not do well in school. He was in trouble and went to Victoria College in Cairo and got suspended. And then his parents decided to send him to his mother was, I think, was Palestinian American as well, but his father was a Palestinian, or the opposite, one of the. And then he went to what do they call it? A boarding school in somewhere in North America, and then ended up in Columbia University, being the head of the literature department at Columbia. And his most famous book was Orientalism, which changed the entire face of literature in the West, and even was the book responsible for the post-colonial theory in the world of literature, if you know about that. And him and Barenboim met in a hotel in London by coincidence and started discussing what was happening in the Middle East. That was in the very early 90s. They formed their relationship. And then when Barenboim was contacted to do a celebration for Weimar being the capital of Europe in 1999, they decided to bring a few musicians from the Middle East to play together, some kind of a collaboration of peace. And but what happened is that they received over I don't know, like 300 or 400, I don't know the exact number, but an overwhelming number of recordings of people from both the Arab countries and from Israel wanting to participate in the project. And they just thought they're going to have 15 or 16 musicians just to do this. So they end up creating the orchestra, and the orchestra since started performing. In about 2008, the orchestra was basically declared as a professional orchestra, because we were all students at this point. Then we all grew, and everybody was having a career outside of that orchestra. We met at least once or twice or sometimes 3 times every year, doing projects and touring the world with the orchestra. Went to Asia, South America, all the famous and the big concert halls in Europe. That was, of course, under Barenboim, and always hosted world-class artists like Walter Admire, René Pepe, Anna-Sophie Mutter, Yo-Yo Ma. Major artists have performed. Pierre Boulez conducted us once. Martha Argerich played the piano. So we have always had these wonderful musicians. But the orchestra keeps going. In light of what's happening, the orchestra will continue to go, but we don't know where things will be, at least for the next generations. But that's really where that was. Our next concert is April 15th in Berlin, in Germany. Yeah, and then there are concerts in August in the Salzburg Festival, Lucerne Festival, the Proms in London, in Royal Albert Hall, and a few other cities, I believe. But that's usually what we go through. But again, it's a challenging time. So,
last question, and then after this question, if you can tell us about what's happening next at the performances that you're conducting.
Yes.
From the center. Last question is, will we know now, in the year 2024, can we see individuals who will be considered classical, Beethoven, Mozart's, Schumann's, or is it impossible to know today who they are?
You mean as composers?
Yes, as composers.
No, we have not had one for a while. But I have to tell you, there are just not enough attention paid to this genre that I think we need a little bit of a change to pay attention and to listen more. The problem is that these things are experimental. Any new composition is, even by a good composer, is experimental, which means it could go either way. So I think symphonies that can afford to present new composers should, and that ties to what you asked me to do. Northbrook Symphony in January 14th, we do have a concert where we are performing a piece by a new composer. I always, if it's a new composer, I ask them to limit their pieces to 2 or 3 minutes, because you do not want to give the audience 20 minutes of your music because you don't know if they're going to like it or not. Have them love your 2 minutes and have them ask for more, and then come back and give them the 15-minute piece. But don't start with your half hour, because they're going to hate you and they're never going to want to go to a concert again. So we have a piece by a young composer, actually very talented. Used to be a pianist and still plays the piano. And there was a piece performed by another very good composer in our last concert in October 29th. But aside from that piece, we're performing Beethoven Violin Concerto with Timmy Chewy, a rising star, on the violin, and then we're playing Brahms Symphony No. 2. So that's Northbrook Symphony right next door, very close from here. And we have some, if somebody's interested, we have some brochures here if you want to take them on your way out. So, yes.
I want to thank you for sharing your time with us. And I've got one more question for you.
Yes.
As a musician and or as a conductor, have you ever experienced one performance that you consider perfection?
Never, but never, of course. But I'll tell you what I experienced. There were 2 or 3 performances in my life where I felt like there was no perfection, but things fell exactly where they need to fall. And everybody felt the energy on the stage and in the audience. I'll tell you what that was. It was 2000. I remember the year. It was 2000. It was 2009 in Köln, in Germany, in Cologne. Barenboim conducting the Brahms 4th Symphony to a German audience. It was full house. After the first movement, the German audience started to clap, and they would not stop clapping. They knew they're clapping when they're not supposed to clap, but they insisted and they wouldn't let go of the clapping. I will never forget that. Another experience was when we performed Bruckner 9th with Barenboim in the Salzburg Festival. This was 2017. And that was another performance where just things felt like everything was in the right place. Now, I cannot tell you there were little things here and there, but if there is nothing, then we're robots. But it really was the ultimate experience.
Thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Great.